Welcome to the Harnessing Your Divine Feminine show, hosted by Andrea Bagby. We believe that when you give a woman an opportunity, you give her the world. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our videos.
Hi, thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for watching Harnessing Your Divine Feminine, a show based on entrepreneurship, empowerment, and elegance with a metaphysical twist. So we believe that when you give a woman an opportunity, you're giving her the world. Today I have with me Kathy Higgens. She is our guest today, and she is going to share with us her knowledge about spirituality and her journey with obsessive compulsive disorder. So Kathy, thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really, truly an honor to be here.
Yes, and thank you for sharing your story with us. Okay, so I know that your business name, what is your business name?
Okay, so my business name is Pure Joy Channeling. It's because I'm a channeler. I channel.
Right. You start channeling.
It just comes through. And then, as you said, my name's Kathy. So Kathy means pure. My own name is Joy, so it just seems like a natural fit to call myself Pure Joy Channeling.
Pure Joy Channeling. And I met Kathy when she came to our women's retreat we have twice a year, and I didn't know that she had all these gifts. I'm so glad she walked through that door that day. And so the reason I started out with your business is because your business was so influential in your healing process. Your mental illness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your spiritual gifts.
Absolutely.
And you're using your spiritual gifts and your business to empower other people.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, when you're giving a woman an opportunity, you're giving her the world. As you continue to work on yourself and heal yourself, you are also healing the world. So it's important to me on my journey to always learn and grow and try to better myself. And the happy byproduct of that is that you're also healing the world, and your vibration, as it raises, you're healing and raising the vibration of everyone around you.
Right? Mm-hmm. So what do you want to share with us today about how spirituality assisted you through your journey with mental illness?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do want to go ahead and make a little statement about mental illness and what that looks like. So many people, I'm so happy that the stigma about mental illness is lifting with time continues. People are starting to understand that mental illness is just on par with physical illness. It just happens sometimes, right? We get sick. What do? We try to get better. If you're someone who wants to try to get better, right? And some people are stuck in their ways, and that's okay. You hold space for them, hope that they find their own healing, but no judgment, right? So, it's not an uncommon thing for light workers to struggle with mental and or physical illness. So for me, it was really interesting. I grew up in a church. I grew up also with a lot of chronic illnesses from the get-go. And that, of course, impacted my mental health, being sick so often and not being able to do things with my peers, like run around without having had asthma. I was very fortunate to outgrow it, but I definitely struggled with primarily asthma from such a young age. I wanted to go out and run, and I wanted to try to do sports, and that just was not in the cards for me. And so, I just, that takes a toll on things when people are saying, why can't you run as fast as us? Why can't you catch up with us? Why do you need your inhaler? I remember my mom would come every once in a while. If I'd have an asthma attack at school, she would come and give me my inhaler, and I would be in the hall, and I remember kids in other classes across the hall looking at me. It just, didn't feel particularly great. So just as we can struggle with physical illness, we can struggle with mental illness. And for me, I will tell you that I didn't have any clue that I had OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I thought everyone's brain worked that way.
Well, I think that there's a difference between we use it too much in society is like, we pin it just because I'm interested in something or I'm particular.
Yeah.
And that's not true. Being particular about your routine or the cleanliness of your house is not the same as OCD.
Right. And
Right.
let's go ahead and acknowledge that people do use those kinds of colloquialisms.
Right.
Excuse me. And there is truth, and we all have a touch of OCD. We all have a touch of ADD. We all have a touch
Right.
of, this, that. I mean, that's the beauty of us. We're all mirroring each other. We all have a touch of this, that, and the other. We're all a tad of a narcissist, but without not necessarily having to be a narcissist.
Right, exactly.
So for me, I just thought everyone's brain works that way. I knew I liked things a particular way. And it was something that finally just became clear to my family. I think in particular, my sister was a freshman in college, and she had taken AP or advanced placement psychology senior year of her high school experience, and it kind of clicked for her that maybe I had something like that at that point. And finally, I had a fit about something. I don't even remember what it was anymore. But my sister was home from spring break, and she had a conversation with my mom in particular, because my dad was, at work. This was normal work hours, and said, I'm kind of concerned about Catherine, and I think she's got something going on. And it led to a conversation where my parents were wanting for me to get some help, try to get a diagnosis, get some treatment. And I'm so thankful for that for so many reasons. I know not everyone has a supportive family or even just support systems as adults to seek out, or opportunities where they can seek out, whether it's, financial opportunities to go and be able to pay a copay somewhere, or just having insurance. And, I was a minor, but it was a very pivotal time in my life. As a high school junior, and getting ready to do college stuff, and trying to make everything look good on paper to a college, and yeah, it's basically I went and I took some testing, and it was like, well, yeah. Check. Just kidding. No, it wasn't. But no, in particular, I had known that I was dealing with depression. And OCD is very comorbid, meaning it coexists with depression and other anxiety disorders, right? So, yes, I did spike up on the depression and the generalized anxiety disorder chart, but also, obviously, on the OCD chart. And the OCD is what really baffled me, because once I started understanding what that was, I just thought everyone's brain works that way.
Right.
Here I am, 17, and I've not known my brain to work any other way.
Right.
So that was a bit jarring. I will say that what took me a long time to learn, which I would love to pass on to people now.
Okay.
Learn. I've done the hard work on this one, so go ahead. And let me give you a piece of information that I got, is to try not to identify and attach so hard to the label, to
Absolutely,
the diagnosis. Yes. Use the diagnosis as a tool of understanding. And that goes with whether that's your diagnosis or someone else's diagnosis. That's really what it's for.
Right.
And I attached pretty hard to that OCD label. Not gonna lie. It was an interesting journey. But I also, it was again, I had said I had a tantrum. It was debilitating. It was, on some levels, it was interfering so much with my life. There's a lot of classic examples of OCDs. A lot of people don't understand exactly what it entails. So just a brief, understanding of what it is. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is compulsions, obsessions, and then followed by compulsions. So if I'm obsessing about germs, germophobia, then the compulsion is I need to wash my hands constantly or sanitize my hands constantly. I constantly need to keep track of where I place things and what's cross-contaminated.
Right.
That was just normal for me to consider that kind of stuff.
I remember when you told me the story about sitting in the booth at a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, wow, that was probably a miserable experience for you, because I don't think that way.
Right. And so this is how, it had become debilitating for me. Even just the simple act of going out to eat with family. I would, and my parents knew this, they knew how I was, and this was pre-diagnosis, and of course work through things with a therapist, so I'll get to that in a minute. But I was very particular about what I touched, where I touched things. So where I sat on the vinyl on a booth and did not touch the table, where I interacted with the silverware, and I would inspect the silverware, and I wouldn't put it down on the table. And the plate, I wouldn't touch the plate after it came out to me. Minimal touching possible, incredibly uptight, shoulders up to the ears, so uptight, just being so afraid that I was gonna get sick, and that's part of the irrational fear behind OCD is, a lot of people will say, oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to get sick or I'm going to die. It's catastrophizing, right? But it's those irrational fears that sometimes you even know how irrational they are, but you cannot stop yourself.
Okay.
So yeah, it was every restaurant experience was like that. My parents knew that there's some restaurants that I would just have panic attacks if I went inside. So, I was trying to get ready to go to college, and
I'm sure it was difficult. I mean, the colleges are not the cleanest place. They're not the cleanest places.
And mind you, this will come full circle in a moment as we're talking, but mind you, I ended up going to UGA, and UGA is the oldest public university in the country.
Okay.
So lots of old buildings, lots of upkeep, lots of time for it to collect dust.
Oh yeah, lots of people. One of the biggest universities. Yes.
So a big focus was we have to get Kathy healthier, but also able to function. And it was a whole process. It's interesting how I understand now a lot about, through my own struggle with mental health, but also in being vulnerable about that as soon as I went to college, how I've been able to connect with people with various physical and mental health issues by just sharing, this is me. Oh, wow, you're depressed too? That's amazing. Oh, you have OCD? Oh, I and it's that colloquialism. Oh yeah, I get particular about how my colored pencils are lined up. Yeah, maybe let me shed some light on what it really is. And I think, as I was understanding things, maybe some judgment came from where I was. I was young. I was still understanding things, and I definitely know that I was not very healthy and kind to some of my peers, as I felt so separate and bullied. So if I could do anything here with this time with you, I would love to apologize to my peers, right? But that's what we're all stuck in survival mode, and we're all just. I didn't know any better. Yeah, and
right.
We're holding space.
As we mature, we learn how to hold space for everyone, and that's having tolerance.
Yeah.
Now, what is the difference between a fixation? And OCD?
Right. Okay. So having a fixation of things having to go a certain way for you, or having to be organized a certain way. Fixations also doesn't also necessarily mean addictions either, right?
Right.
Fixation is just kind of like a rumination on this is gonna be how my dorm room's gonna look, right?
Okay.
This is exactly how I'm gonna have it set up. I'm gonna have it in this color scheme. I'm gonna have it. It gets kind of like that, and as soon as one thing's out of place, tantrum kind of a thing, right? An unhealthy fixation just kind of takes control of your mind, but not all fixations are unhealthy.
Right.
And not all fixations are indicative of a mental health issue. Sometimes it's situational, right? But yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me sometimes when I think of how my brain was at the time, and how I didn't know that I was necessarily just like a angsty teen that might have been hard to deal with at times,
right?
Because in my brain, I was just living my life trying to be.
At what points did your parents say, "Wait a minute, I think this is more than it just being a teenager"?
Yeah, that spring break, okay. When my sister came home, and for the week, it was kind of an opening of a conversation. That's a good question, though. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But I had talked to my mom in particular about it, and she knew that there was some underlying depression possibly, but she also wasn't sure that medication was going to be the right answer. They did try cognitive behavioral therapy briefly when I was 14, and then my therapist got pregnant and went on maternity leave, and I just was like, no, I'm okay for right now. But that was after, in particular, I had a bad friend break up.
Okay.
So I think they knew, they had an idea for sure. My parents were quite intuitive and insightful. But I think just like anything, the question is, how do you navigate this?
Right.
Am I seeing, internet now, people use Dr. Google to try to diagnose things. Right. And I mean, it's not that information wasn't on the internet back then. It wasn't to quite the plethora of information that it is in abundance now. But I think they more or less wanted to have a better understanding of me and of course my sister as well, but just I think they kind of got clued in that maybe something's going on, that we maybe it's okay if she's on medication or something. My mom was just worried that I was going to in particular become suicidal, because suicidal rates with antidepressants as a teenager can be incredibly high because of the hormones changing. I remember when my mom talked to me about that when I was in my late teens after diagnosis and going through the motions of therapy and medication, all that. And I said, Mom, I was already suicidal.
Right.
So, but she didn't know that. I was very good at hiding a lot of this stuff. And my fears in particular, which were very illuminating to look back on.
Right.
Yeah. In particular, one of the things I had to work on with a therapist to attend UGA was I made a hierarchy, and I actually came across this when I moved recently, a hierarchy of fears list. And it was the top 10 worst things that I could experience. Like, what do you feel like you just wouldn't be able to cope with life afterwards, right? And I remember number 1 at the top was watching someone die.
Okay.
But all of the things on the list were relative to death and like antiques, old buildings.
Okay. That's
Things
interesting.
that belong to,
Yes.
yeah, it was very particular. Things that belonged to people that had passed on, and having to touch them, having to smell. Like, I think number 10, maybe it was 20 things, but towards the bottom list, like what causes you the least distress, but it's still stressful.
Right.
That's part of the hierarchy we worked through, was smelling old books. Right? Like, I never enjoyed going to a library and then like flipping through books because it smelled like the books were old, even if they weren't old. Right?
And some people love that smell.
Oh yeah.
Right? They're like, oh, I
Absolutely.
love the smell of books.
Some people are like, please perfume that. I want to wear that.
But you were like, no smelling old
Oh,
books.
it'd give me panic attacks.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is the interesting part of this journey and how my brain worked, but also the fears that came up that I became so obsessed about, and the compulsive, like, I can't touch this because it's old, and if I even raise it, I need to immediately wash like at least 3 times. And you know, it's amazing because now I understand that this was psychometry, and this was me picking up on energies.
Okay, so that was like your spiritual gifts coming out,
Mhm.
and your brain, because you necessarily didn't have the teachers around you to say, wait a minute, there's more to just an old book than dust.
Right.
It smells.
And it was just such a particular and peculiar
Right.
kind of phobia, you
Mhm.
know, that clumped together. And yeah, I didn't have that understanding. And this is why it's been so interesting to reflect on it and be like, oh my gosh, like my mental health issue, this one in particular, and the phobias of it, so much aligns with what I didn't know was going on at the time. And I didn't know how to discern the energy and how to, like, what I was even feeling. I didn't even know I was
Right.
feeling energy.
So what is psychometry?
Okay, so psychometry is the ability to pick up on energy from touching or holding an object.
Okay.
So, like, you know, if I put this glass of water in my hand, now I know who this glass belongs to. And I might even be able to see when they bought it, how they purchased it. It's funny because I am kind of picking up on who it belongs to, and they actually got these glasses from Amazon, and it's funny how that goes.
Okay.
And
I didn't know that. You're probably accurate.
yeah.
Okay.
They were a good deal, and they got the job done, and they look classy and professional,
Right.
And yeah, so I met their needs, right?
So you can pick up on an antique. If I were to bring you my grandmother's antique,
Yeah.
and say, okay, read this for me.
Yeah, though it's interesting. I couldn't, because I totally can, and this is a very shared common experience with psychic mediums and intuitive empaths. But I just, you said that, and I was immediately brought back to the therapist that I had for quite a while I was working through this stuff. But that one that I had from when I was 17 forward, she's great. I haven't had to see her in years. She's happy with a family now. But anyway, she brought in her grandmother's ring,
Okay.
and it was like 100 years old. And she said, someday my goal is for you to be able to touch this.
Okay.
And I was like,
You were like,
yeah,
no,
right.
right.
And I remember she brought that back in a few years later, maybe 5 years later even. And I just was like, I was like, are you anxious about this at all? Like, I had gotten to that point.
You had gotten through it.
I had worked through it. But here's the interesting way that because it's interesting how we were working through that list, and then what did I say my worst fear was? My worst fear was watching someone die.
Right.
And then I watched people die, like when I was 20.
Okay.
It was hard to process. We kind of ended up having to jump because here we were working through the hierarchy, like making good strides, and then it was just, I mean, that was my number one fear, and it came into fruition.
Spirit was like, here you go.
Yeah.
Here you go. We're going to get through this.
And I see that now.
Right.
But it's interesting how to get past the fears, and especially with that happening, the one way I could start working through these better, the top ones, was to say, okay, ghosts don't exist. Because ghosts were a total part of this whole fear. Like, I don't want to see a ghost. I don't want to hear a ghost. Like, I don't want to, like, this was all part of it. Like, I was so afraid of death and anything that belonged to someone that, like, could have even potentially died. Like, I don't want to touch that. What if that person's still alive? Well, they're dead. Well, they're like 80 years old. Okay, but I don't know that.
Yep.
They could be dead.
So, but all your parents knew is that you were sort of a germaphobe.
Yeah, right.
That you had like this whole world going on in your head.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why it's upon reflection, it's so much clearer now. The way that my therapist and I had to work through that hierarchy, though, was I had to start believing that ghosts didn't exist. I had to start believing that those things. No, here's the thing. I knew I was psychic. I joked about it. It's like, people, how do you know that? I'm like, I'm psychic. Ha ha.
Right.
Even as a teenager.
Right.
It was one of those things that, despite my fears, I still couldn't totally shut it off.
Right.
I know now that this was like psychometry and psychic mediumship and like all the things that just made me afraid. So I had to kind of turn from having grown up in the church, like I said,
right,
and believing that like there's an afterlife and all that too. Don't believe in an afterlife. Don't believe that ghosts can even exist then, right? And I went from, wherever I was on the spectrum to begin with to like the polar opposite, and that gave me the space to heal. Of course, now, like, this is the interesting part of healing, right? Is you can kind of bounce back and forth on the spectrum of belief with various things, right? So it was important for me to have that experience where I was like, even though I still kind of believe there was an afterlife, I was like, well, there's no hell, so that's at least helpful. These ghosts wouldn't hurt me, but there's also no things.
So at what point did you decide, you know what, there's no hell? We grew up with similar Baptist backgrounds, right?
Right.
At some point in my life, I had to decide, for me, I'm going to choose to believe there's no hell. I feel peace with that.
Yeah, and I know that that's like part of my belief now,
right?
For sure. But it was really in that journey of, okay, even though you feel like there might still be a heaven, you need to shut that off so you can believe there's no ghosts. The easiest thing was to first think there's no hell.
Okay, yeah, that's the first step with a lot of people's healing journey. Yeah, is a common denominator.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Because what if you were holding something and that person may have gone to hell? That's terrifying. Right.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Totally. And that's it's funny now because I hindsight.
Right.
And of course, like I was gonna say hindsight's 2020, but 2020, the pandemic, like
right? Everyone had that moment. Oh no.
Oh yeah. It's funny how I had so much of that germophobia kind of stuff, most especially, come up, rear its ugly head. I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought I've been past this. I thought I've been good for like almost a decade now. What is this? And it had to come up to be purged, but I was having panic attacks every time I went to the grocery store the first several months of the pandemic. And so that came up for an opportunity for me to look at it and say, okay, now all of the germophobia and like thoughts and visualizations you had in your head of germs spreading around is what they're talking about in the news.
So they're basically like, no, that was real.
Yeah,
right.
Oh,
so
totally.
So it debilitated millions of people.
Oh yeah, and I got so much information about how my understandings of germophobia were actually kind of lessons Partially about germs and germ theory, yes. I mean, germ theory, I think, is like 150-year-old term there from when germs were just discovered. But it was also spirit showing me how energy can be shared and spread.
Right.
And that's really what it was. Quantum entanglement, with two particles that have touched each other will always have a connection to each other.
Right.
That was totally part of my OCD belief.
Right.
It's been illuminating to look back and have a better understanding of where my brain was, and for spirit to come in and say, for me to be like, okay, so what was that about, you guys? And for spirit to come in and say, well, this is what it was, and this is why, but this is how you took it. You're a kid. Again, holding space for where we all are as kids, and we're all in various places. I mean, we are as adults too, but as kids, I mean, you can't put blame on yourself. You can't put blame on other kids necessarily either.
Okay, so one particular experience you had as a kid, what was that? And you drove me by the house.
I did, because you and I were having a meal in the area that I grew up in, and I was like, the restaurant was closed, so we went to another one. I'm like, I'm going to show you the house that I lived in.
Right.
And I just kind of want to have an understanding of, like, what you get, and if it's on the same, because we can often be kind of shut off from the experiences that shape us or have an important part of us that were in the past. It still might not be totally clear to us. So it's kind of nice being like, hey, what do you get on this?
Right. Right. Well, it made sense to me when I drove past the house, and it was like another puzzle piece for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had asked you what you were picking up on. And I mean, do you remember exactly?
I do.
Okay,
it was the little girl that lived in that house.
Yeah.
That likely passed away.
Yeah. And not necessarily passed away in the house.
No, but she was sick.
She
was sick and she passed away.
Yeah.
Which was like a whole puzzle piece for you.
Yeah, because she was like bedridden, and this is also, from my understanding, not an uncommon thing.
It's not an uncommon thing.
For people to have, not just as kids, but to have like ghost friends or imaginary friends,
right?
But also have visitations from spirits, because you're so much more open when you're younger. It's also just the fact that I remember having this energy visit me at the same time every night, and to me, I saw it in my head as like a Grim Reaper kind of cloaked, gray, black, frightening, right? But now I understand that was, someone who just wanted to be my friend.
Right. She had passed away in the house. She
Right.
was a sick little girl.
Right.
She wanted to be your friend, and then your childhood mind was like, well, I don't want to get your germs. And that's how your brain wired.
Yep. That's how, and I was 5. So I was 5 when we moved into that house.
Okay.
And those visitations started like right off the bat. I mean, you psychically saw how her and I talked, and once she told me what had happened, it freaked me out, and I didn't want to play with her anymore.
Right.
So again, I was in kindergarten, or not even quite in kindergarten when we moved into that house. So that whole, and it's interesting too how, I mean, it's interesting even now just talking about it. It's taking me back,
Well, it's interesting you said your parents were intuitive.
Yeah.
Right? So then parents are intuitive, normally have psychic kids, and most all kids are psychic very young. Like, they're born psychic and then they grow out of it, sort of, or turn it off.
Yeah, and they're still
open. And your parents were just buying a house. Like, your dad was just, like, providing, right? Yeah. He didn't, like, walk in, like, with any ill intentions.
Right,
and then there was just a child ghost in that house.
Yeah.
And then that's how your brain wired. which explains the domino effect
of germophobia, especially,
right?
A key feature of my OCD, right?
Which is important. That's why parents should talk to their kids. What are you seeing? Validate what they're seeing and explain to them. Children do die. Children do get sick. Some get better. Some pass, but you can't catch it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But it was the 90s, right?
Yes.
And you were not. It probably wasn't the resources, right? We were saying out there, like you couldn't Google psychic kid.
No, we didn't have internet
You
yet.
didn't, right? Right. I didn't either. Right? So your parents weren't like Googling, what if my kid sees a spirit? What if my kid is a germaphobe? There was no resource, right?
Yeah.
So while your parents had those resources, they had a lot of resources though still. They had a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And then to navigate, but for the person who doesn't even have those resources to like call a therapist or call a doctor, because your dad was in healthcare. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So he had probably more resources than most, right?
Yeah. But it wasn't something I really talked about.
Right. Because you would be like, where your mom would just see you wash your hands extra, in your head it was like just mind-blowing things happening, right?
Yeah. And once they had a better understanding of like what my brain, like I feel like I remember my parents saying, we had no idea this was going on in your inner world and we're just so sorry that we didn't get you help. I mean, I feel like they had felt, and I don't want to speak for them, but this is just from what I remember. I mean, this is, dating myself, but over almost 2 decades ago at this point, right? It's the guilt. Mm-hmm. I know that they felt some guilt. Of course. And they're amazing parents. They always have done the best that they can, and no parent's perfect, and you can't. Like, I don't want for them to feel guilty for that. I remember saying that. It's so clear to me now that I was on the journey that I was supposed to be on for a reason. Mm-hmm. And that I experienced all of these little things that add up to big things for a reason. And that's okay. I have more compassion for my inner child and my younger self now. Not that I didn't already, it's just a level of understanding with that compassion of, it's okay that you're feeling this way and there's reasons this is happening. When I was 22, with that spirit that was in the house, I had ended up being back at home. And I just could not sleep.
So it was the same little girl that was in your room.
17 years.
17 years. The same little girl spirit.
And I just finally was like, again, I was at that point where I had been believing there's no such thing as ghosts. There's no such thing as like, God and the afterlife and all that. I was on that side of the spectrum so I could heal and better understand myself and use the tool of diagnostics to work through things, right? But I knew that I was feeling stuff and it was making me anxious, and I finally just was like, I am so sorry that I cannot help you, and I don't know how to help you go into the light.
You finally told the little girl that at 22 years old.
I was like, I said, I apologize. I apologized. I said, I wish I could help you, but I don't know how. Please go find someone who can. And please, it's been 17 years and I need peace. Please leave. And it left. And I slept better in that house after that.
Good.
But it took that long. For me to even say that. So then I go from that side of the spectrum back to, okay, ghosts exist.
Now you're like, okay, bring on the ghost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What word of advice would you give? How can we be there for people who have been diagnosed with OCD?
Well, just like with anyone else. With anyone else, truly. Whether you know what they're dealing with on a mental or physical level or spiritual or emotional level, mm-hmm. right? You always want to hold space for people.
Always.
You always want to show compassion to mm-hmm. them. That is honestly one of the best things we can do to anyone in this world. We try not to pass judgment.
Right. Just let them be. Yeah.
Know that everyone's going through their own difficulties, and know that everyone's got their place in the world and a purpose, and know that, like, someone might have the opposite belief systems that you have, but they hold the balance for you.
Right. They are. They're holding the balance for you.
And it's okay that they feel that way and they have those beliefs.
Right, exactly. I love to talk to people that are different than me.
Yeah, me too. You can learn something from everyone.
So early on, the most important message here is everything that affects us psychologically affects us physiologically, and vice versa, right?
Right.
So how has that helped you? So now you're a professional metaphysician.
Yeah.
Okay. So how has that helped you in your career today?
Right. So the interesting thing that I had said towards the beginning is try to use it as a tool of understanding and not a tax of labels.
Right, because I always say sometimes we need a diagnosis to research.
Absolutely.
And it gives us a tool of empowerment.
Yeah.
But I don't identify as it.
Yeah.
We don't identify as our diagnosis, right?
And I identified as my diagnoses for the longest time. And mind you, I'm talking about primarily Western medicine, but I think that, Western and Eastern medicine, they have their place, and they're both very valid.
Right.
So I just want to put that out there. That's my belief
Yeah, they
system,
are.
and in no way am I going to ever discredit either.
Right. Exactly.
I was in healthcare for a decade, so I know how hard people in the field work to try to make people better.
Absolutely. And I'm obviously you made it through 2020, and I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
I mean, it was hard for everyone. I'm proud for every single one of us.
Oh yeah.
But you really had to face some stuff again.
I had to, yeah. So how it affected my physical health. I was attaching to those diagnoses. I had a better understanding of that. And truly just prior to 2020 is when I got a better understanding of myself and how I'd been identifying with all of my diagnoses and how to use that and flip that. So to detach, right, from the prior thinking, and how can I continue to use the tools that I know to use and the ways to get better, and how can I improve my life, and really try to heal myself. It's funny because I really didn't totally acknowledge that I had healed myself with some of this stuff, on the physical level most especially, but also things on the mental spectrum and emotional spectrum, until you pointed it out to me.
That's when I was like,
you did, girl. You healed yourself so much. I'm like, you're right, I have.
Well, when I first met you came to my women's retreat. It's so funny. It's so comical because I didn't know at the time. To me, you were just another woman that I was holding space for, right? And I was like, come to our haunted retreat center.
Yep.
And you slept in your car. And I remember like,
oh yeah, because I couldn't sleep one night.
why is she in her car? But I held space. I was like, okay, she's doing her. She's in her car. She's okay.
Yeah, I tried not to, but it's like when you're like, all right, I'm awake and everyone else is asleep and nobody can help me with all the ghosties.
It was literally
My car's
like, and there were 30, metaphysicians or people that understood spirituality and like holistic healing and
not to mention those cabins were like over 150 years old.
They were, and
almost
see, to me, I was like, oh, this is fascinating. I love it.
Yep.
And you pulled up, you were like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
right?
yeah, it was just, that kind of stuff totally brings that stuff up, and I still hadn't totally healed from that.
Right.
At the time, for sure. It's interesting, though. It just took me the longest time to understand why. And sure enough, I was having spirits visit me there, and I just was kind of like,
but you had other people, right?
Yes.
The next morning, people validated the spirit.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I'm like, okay, I'm not nuts.
No, you're not nuts.
And also, how do I deal with them? Like, can you guys tell me what to do? I did have to, before I went to that first retreat, I had to know that I was protected and safe before I could start understanding any spiritual, metaphysical.
That's important. That's another base thing. You have to figure out hell, and then you have to make sure you're safe. That's a very common.
That was always my
step.
first question. Am I safe?
Right.
How do I know I'm safe? How can I protect myself?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was like, because I felt so unsafe with everything for decades.
With everything from the spirit world, from the physical world, both. Mm-hmm. That was hard for you to get through, but yet you navigated life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, pat on my back.
I know. I really find it awesome that today you see clients professionally.
Yeah. I'm really very, very happy that I've been able to step into that. It's amazing to me to see where we all are on our journey and to hold space for people, and to hold space for people no matter what they're going through and and to be so non-judgmental and loving, because that's just who I am at my core. Even though, I think the shadow of that when my, everything was unbalanced is, judgmental and like closed off. Right. I'm so happy that I'm able to do readings for people. And I do more than just readings, but I mean, readings are interesting because it's the same way that I, was afraid of all the energies coming in.
Yeah. And now you're like, okay, I'm connecting to the energy.
Yeah. And I'm just trusting what comes through too. So, I think I think this is part of how, when ego isn't involved as much, I would say, because we always try to like be free of ego in this job if you're really heart-centered about it, right? Is when I'll say something so specific, you could not make that up, and it resonates with the person, and they're just amazed, and I'm like, wow, yeah, that's awesome. Even like asking spirit recently about who my imaginary friend before I had moved into that house, because who that was, and they told me her name, and Sarah Ashmore, and she was about 4 or 5 when she died and she drowned. And I kid you not, after I had that conversation with my spirit guides, I put it in Google because I was like, I wonder if she died like right before I was born. No, she died in 1803 in a hurricane off the coast of Georgia.
Of course.
And someone had written a blog about that family. And I just was completely amazed that, she had died like 200 years almost before I was born. And yet she sought out my energy to play with.
Which is hilarious to me, not hilarious, but sarcastically hilarious, that you suffer from asthma.
Right.
You were empathing her symptoms.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's, again, not in any discreditation to healthcare, but that's part of healing too, is understanding where things come from.
Well, both sides. You have to address it spiritually and physically. You have to do both, right?
Mm-hmm. And so, once I started understanding some of the spiritual and metaphysical reasons for why I'd been experiencing some things, I was able to finally let go of some of the things that, and I'm still a work in progress, right?
We all are.
Not exactly. No one's perfect, right? But I'm so grateful that I get to have, and Sarah has since gone to the light. So I did try to like ask her to come in and give gratitude after they told me that, and I looked it up and everything, like, well, she's gone to the light now, but I was able to talk to her soul, that had, but it wasn't Sarah in particular, right? And I love the name Sarah so much because of her. I named my cat Sarah, and it's funny, I had her 17 years,
right,
so and kids are amazing like that too. The kind of stuff they pick up on, like you had said. But I think I'm so happy to be able to help people and assist people on their journeys and on their path. Everything I do is because I want to be of service, and because I want to do something for the highest good of everyone and for their highest self, their highest path possible. So, I know that I've had that space held for me in my journey. I'm so happy that I can do that for other people now. It's really, it's so fulfilling. I'm so much happier. There's Spirit's so supportive, of course.
What kind of questions, if I'm like, okay, I'm going to make an appointment with Kathy, and I go in your office, what would happen?
So, I mean, I always let people know that, you know, I meet them where they're at. I honor their sovereignty. I welcome skeptics.
Yes. Oh, I love it.
I welcome skeptics. Totally. And if they want to sit there completely quiet and just see what comes through, that is totally fine.
Okay.
You know, the thing to keep in mind with anyone who's skeptical coming into a reading is, because I've been that person. I have been that skeptic coming in.
Like, you turned it all off at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were like, this is not true.
Yeah. And I've been like, you know, I'm not going to say anything to see what they come up with.
Right.
Totally okay.
Okay.
So I totally honor that. But you have to have at least an open mind.
Right.
Because if you don't have an open mind, it's just going to be kind of like a block, because you're not allowing anything in. And we can only work with permission. And I always hold space for the people that book with me. I'm then getting their permission, right? So, you know, I honor people where they're at. If they have specific questions, you know, the more specifics a question we have, the more specific the response we're going to get from Spirit.
Right. And you want efficiency, right?
Well, it's their time, their money.
Money, right?
I want to empower them with information as well. So, you know, a lot of people will ask about their gifts, which I know were some of the biggest questions I had when I first started seeing people for readings, and trying to understand that stuff. So some people ask about that. You know, some people do want to connect with loved ones. And something that comes up somewhat frequently, not too frequently, with people who are trying to connect with someone who has passed on, is we have to have a level of unattachment, or at least unexpectation, like non-expectation. Because sometimes we can push people or spirit away from expecting them to come in. They're like, well, I can talk to this person, but the person I really want to come through, I can't talk to them. Why aren't they coming through to me? Because you want them so badly to come through, but they're already around you. It's just, they're already sending you messages.
Right.
You know,
we get messages all the time.
All the time. So yeah, I mean, there's also, I honor whatever kind of question comes through. Some people, every once in a while, and I do get people that want to talk about aliens. I'm so open to that.
I love aliens.
Yeah. You know, it's a lot of people always want to talk about their love life. And there's a reason for that. We're interdimensional souls having human experience. And one of the things on the Earth School that's different from many of the other schools is we get to have relationships. We get to have romantic relationships.
Right.
And so that's part of why so many people ask about their love life, and why they want to seek that out, and they want to try to understand, because we're learning how to connect with people, and we're learning how to connect with people in a way, or other souls in a way that we don't always get to learn in other schools.
Like other galaxies, they're not having these romantic relationships that we're having. They're not reproducing the same way. They're not. Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of people do ask about that, and so I have some people really, that's so cliche, but I want to ask about my love life. Oh, there's no judgment.
No.
It is like, you're so fine. Like, let's have your questions answered. I also do often see timelines, or at least potential timelines. And the thing to always keep in mind, here's one of the other things that I like to tell clients is, you know, I do see them, but we all have free will.
We definitely have free will.
We all have choices we can make. They can put us on a different path separate from what I'm picking up on in that moment. And so just keep that in mind, because we can get very attached to potential outcomes and potential timelines.
Where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm at the Open Mind Center, off 400 in Holcomb Bridge.
In Atlanta?
In Roswell.
Georgia.
And I'm there Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You can call or walk in or book online. All of my information that links to the website as well for the Open Mind Center, openmindcenter.com, is on my social media. I have Instagram and Facebook, and it's just Pure Joy Channeling, like we said at the beginning of our talk. So they can look at my information. I'm sharing all sorts of like memes.
Right.
I think it's just like it's funny. I saw actually a meme this week that said, you're a multidimensional being connecting with people through memes.
Yeah, that's true, right?
Yeah,
that's our
because we
society.
connect with people.
That's how we connect with people.
But I like to share it because I think that it's a nice way to get, ideas out and thoughts out and connection. And yeah, I'm so honored to be able to help people now, and to have the experiences that I've had and the understandings that I have, and to kind of bring that. I mean, that's the thing about different metaphysicians.
Mm-hmm.
We all have our own experiences that can kind of shape things.
We do.
Despite the fact we're all getting information from spirit. Spirit will sometimes say, we want for you to share this because you had this experience. Or it's interesting how I'll pick up on the terminology that's coming in from that person. I'll use all these phrases and words I don't normally use. But every once in a while, they're like, we're going to take this from your brain, and they'll tell me in a reading that they're doing that. I'm like, well, this is interesting, so they're going to take this from my brain to help illuminate this for you. But I mean, and I think that's, why we all have, we all have the opportunity to connect with other people. And, I think we all know that the right person's going to connect with the person they're supposed to see.
Absolutely. If you feel like you would like to connect with Kathy, you can find her at Pure Joy Channeling on all the social media platforms or at the openmindcenter.com. Thank you, Kathy, for sharing, for being vulnerable and courageous to give people around the world opportunities to expand on very, very common issues that have lots of stigmas and people don't talk about.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And remember to give a woman an opportunity today. You're giving her the world. Thanks. Bye.
The Harnessing Your Divine Feminine show is produced by 8 Robinsons TV. Subscribe for only $30 per year for access to exclusive and archived content. Visit www.the8ROBINSONS.tv. Thank you for watching.